Did you know that Dana White went from being a bellboy to a $500 million man? Dana White is nearly a household name among those who follow the world of mixed martial arts. The UFC president started off as a bellboy and worked his way up to become one of the most ruthless, shrewd and successful business people in the world. And if Dana White hadn't been around, the Ultimate Fighting Championship probably wouldn't exist today. So how did Dana White go from being broke to a net worth of $500 million? And why is the success of the UFC attached to Dana White? This is the untold story of the UFC boss Dana White. From being a bellboy to a $500 million man. Dana White, the president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, presides over a worldwide enterprise that is currently worth $5 billion and is seeing ever-increasing levels of popularity. And thanks to him, mixed martial arts has never been more popular. But it took more than 2 decades of effort, sweat and tears for it to mature into the behemoth that is today. His path and that of the UFC are intricately linked in every respect. This is the type of story that will certainly find its way to Hollywood at some point because of its dizzying heights, gut-wrenching depths and plot twists that defy logic. From an early age, White had a strong feeling of independence and the ability to rely on himself. However, because of his alcoholic father and his mother's unceasing efforts in her numerous jobs, he and his sister were frequently left alone in the house. His childhood was spent mostly in Massachusetts, but he did spend some time in Las Vegas, which is where the crucial initial piece of the UFC puzzle was developed. Fortunately, White eventually finished his education and started his professional life on the East Coast of the United States. And after completing his education and working on a number of menial jobs, he came to the conclusion that he had nothing to lose by pursuing a career in the competitive gaming industry. White began working as a bellman in a hotel when he was 19 years old. And after becoming dissatisfied with his employment and realizing he had nothing to lose by quitting, he made the decision to pursue his interest in mixed martial arts. White showed a lot of initiative and competence in the way he handled his newfound purpose. Though he worked as a volunteer and free assistant to a former Golden Gloves champion by the name of Peter Welch, he gained as much knowledge as possible about the sport of boxing. So before starting his own successful business educating normal people in boxing workout courses, he experienced working as a trainer, a corner man and promoter and a manager. This period of Dana White's life came to an end rather quickly when he was approached by some members of the Boston mob, which wasn't particularly unusual during this time period, and he was required to pay $2,500 for operating in their region. This was the beginning of the end for Dana White in this particular aspect of his life, or so he thought. White was poor at the time, and he knew he could not pay the Mafia the amount of money they demanded. So he came to the conclusion that the most prudent course of action would be to flee all the way to Las Vegas. After relocating to Las Vegas, White took on the role of managing the professional careers of 2 UFC athletes. However, after a disagreement over a contract with one of the fighters, Dana White decided to invest in the UFC, only to find out that the company was in a precarious financial position and on the point of going bankrupt. White shared this information with his close friends, the Fertitta brothers, who ultimately decided to purchase the UFC for $2 million and then appointed Dana White as the organization's president. The Fertitta brothers gave White a 9% ownership stake in Zuffa LLC, the company that owned and operated the UFC. But before Dana White was appointed president, the Ultimate Fighting Championship came dangerously close to going bankrupt. Luckily, White fully transformed the company into a multi-billion-dollar organization, which resulted in him becoming a multi-millionaire. So how did the transformation of UFC happen? White increased his advertising efforts in 2001, which included corporate sponsorship. Pay-per-view events and DVD releases were also highly lucrative for the UFC, but the organization's fame began to increase after it began appearing on reality television. Although the UFC has had quite a bit of success with pay-per-view events and DVD releases, the success of UFC didn't come from those two. Do you remember the UFC 40 event that took place in 2002 and featured the fight between Tito Ortiz and Ken Shamrock? That was it. The truth is, although the fortune of the UFC was initially quite uncertain, it is said that success began following the event. This event is regarded as a watershed moment in the history of the UFC, since it was the first time the organisation actually made money on one of its fight cards. The UFC rose to become the most successful mixed martial art promotion company in the world, while White was at the helm. Currently, there are women-only divisions in 4 of the 12.5 total categories. The UFC not only broadcasts its events in 175 countries throughout the world, but it also boasts more than 100 training centres located all over the world. Despite the fact that WME-IMG purchased the UFC for $4 billion in 2016, Dana White maintained his position as president of the organisation and was awarded a stake in the newly formed business. Even more impressively, White was able to secure an agreement with ESPN that gave the network exclusive pay-per-view rights and other UFC rights in 2018. Because it would make it simpler for fans to obtain material and would provide them with better rates and value, this agreement was extremely beneficial for the UFC. And later in 2019, Dana White made public the news that he had renewed his contract with the UFC and would continue to serve as president for an additional 7 years once the extension takes effect. But is UFC the only source of finance for Dana White? Dana White does not aggressively promote any other companies than the UFC, yet he does have a favourite brand. Fans commonly observe White advertising the whiskey firm Howler Head, which was created by Steve Lipp. The myth that Dana White was the original creator of the company spread like wildfire after internet users said that the UFC president himself was actively publicising the organisation. Lipp, on the other hand, made it quite obvious that they had just recently formed a partnership with White after being acquainted with him through Tyson Fury's manager. And now, one of the most interesting parts: how does White spend his well-earned fortune? Since the autumn of 2016, White has reportedly acquired 3 residences in an exclusive Tournament Hills enclave of Las Vegas. He owns a sizable percentage of the property that is located in close proximity to Pine Island Court and the 6,000 square foot mansion that he acquired there in the preceding decade. According to the county records, in October 2016, he acquired a property that was roughly 7,700 square feet for just under $1.8 million. In January, he purchased a home that was 5,500 square feet for $2.4 million. And in March, he purchased a home that was almost 4,700 square feet for $2 million. But what about his car collection? His collection includes a staggering number and a variety of different types of autos. According to various sources in the media, White has a net worth of $500 million, which gives him access to automobiles that most of us can only fantasize about driving, let alone owning. This includes a 1971 Plymouth Barracuda, a Ferrari Testarossa, a 1969 Chevrolet Camaro, and a 1969 Ford Bronco. He also owns a Cadillac Escalade ESV, a Ferrari F430 Spider, and plenty of other automobiles. As we have seen, the Ultimate Fighting Championship was brought back from the brink of extinction and transformed into a multi-billion-dollar industry in less than 15 years, due to the dogged determination and unwavering passion for the profession displayed by Dana White. This great achievement created a fortune for White, while also keeping the MMA sport alive. Well, it's quite an inspiring story of a man who believed he could change the whole industry. He surely deserves his $500 million net worth. So, what do you think about the great achievement of Dana White? Is he a legend who has made a mark in the UFC industry? And by the way, without him, do you think that there would be a UFC? That's all for this video. See you in the next one.